I've watched enough people come and go to know this. The best things rarely arrive the way we expect. We plan, we hope, we picture how life ought to unfold. Then something walks through the door wearing a face we never imagined. Most folks miss their blessings because they're too busy looking for the wrong shape. The stagecoach was 40 minutes late. Daniel Carter's Sunday coat had soaked through with sweat he couldn't afford to show. Red Creek's main street stretched silent in the September heat. 3 women pretended to examine fabric at Harwell's window, their eyes cutting sideways every few seconds. The whole town knew. A mail-order bride, 53 years old. Daniel pulled out his father's brass pocket watch. Scratched crystal. Slow hands. Dust rose on the eastern road. The Concord coach groaned to a stop. An elderly white woman stepped down first. Daniel's shoulders dropped an inch. Then a second figure appeared in the doorway. Moccasined feet. Calico dress with beadwork at the collar. High cheekbones. Dark eyes that held his without blinking. Apache. The matchmaker's letter crumpled in his fist. Paper tore. She stepped onto the dirt street and said one word, "Mr. Carter. If this opening spoke to you, I'd love to hear where you're watching from today. And if you've been enjoying these stories without subscribing, I'd be grateful if you'd consider joining us. It truly helps, more than you know." Daniel grabbed her elbow and steered her behind Muller's livery before the women at Harwell's could get a proper look. The smell hit first horse manure baking in the heat, old hay, the sharp tang of urine soaking into packed dirt. Flies circled lazy patterns above a water trough gone green with algae. He released her arm, stepped back, put distance between them. "Ma'am, I don't mean no offense, but—" She waited. Her carpet bag hung from one hand. The other rested easy at her side. Not a single twitch. Daniel's throat closed up. He tried again. "The ranch is 20 miles out. Nearest neighbors, an hour ride on a good horse. And folks around here, they ain't—" He stopped, swallowed. "They won't take kindly to—" Still, she said nothing. Just stood there with those dark eyes fixed on his face, patient as stone. The silence stretched. A horse stamped in one of the stalls. Somewhere out front, a wagon rattled past. "You asked for a woman who don't scare easy." Her voice was low, unhurried. "Here I am." "That ain't the point." "And what is the point?" "Mr. Carter." He had no answer. His mouth opened, closed. He looked at his boots, dust-caked, cracked at the toe. 4 years of letting things fall apart. She pulled off her riding gloves, turned her palms up, calluses, thick as saddle leather, rope burns scarred across the base of her fingers. These were not the hands of a woman who sat by windows waiting for rescue. "The agency on the reservation," she said. "They told me about your advertisement. You need hands. I need land. I ain't here for shelter. Mr. Carter, I'm here to work. It won't. 30 days. He looked up. 30 days? She repeated. "I can't prove my keep. I'll leave. You lose nothing but a month." The flies droned. Heat pressed down on his shoulders like a wool blanket. Sweat crawled down his spine. 30 days. What did he have to lose? The ranch was already failing. His pride was already dust. But those hands, those steady eyes, the way she held herself like she'd faced down worse than a broken rancher behind a livery stable. What had the agency told her about him? The buckboard creaked west out of Red Creek. iron springs groaning with every rut in the road. Daniel kept his eyes forward. The woman Ayana, she'd said her name, was sat 3 feet away on the bench seat, her carpetbag wedged between her boots. Neither spoke for the first mile. Dust rose behind the wheels and settled on their shoulders. The late afternoon sun pressed down, turning the scrub brush gold, and the distant mountains purple at their peaks. Daniel's mare, a gray named Molly, knew the way home and needed no guidance. His hands held the reins loose. "Creek's that way." He jerked his chin toward a line of cottonwoods to the south. "Boundary stones run along that ridge yonder." Ayana followed his gesture. Her eyes moved slow across the landscape, not the quick, darting glance of someone seeing new country, but the careful sweep of someone reading it. How many had... Daniel's jaw tightened. Wrong question. She should have asked about the house, the kitchen, whether there was a church within riding distance. 62, last count. Water rights, secured. He shifted on the seat. Only thing that is... The buckboard dipped into a dry wash and climbed out the other side. Molly's hooves crunched on loose gravel. A red-tailed hawk circled overhead, riding the thermals. Grazing rotation. Daniel turned his head. She was still watching the land, not him. "What?" "Your pastures. You rotate the herd, or you let them graze where they stand. I move them when the grass gets thin. Mineral licks. Salt blocks by the water tank." She nodded once, said nothing else. The question sat wrong in his chest. Like a stone he couldn't cough up. 4 years he'd been alone on that ranch. And the women who'd written to the matchmaker's office, the few who'd actually answered, had asked about curtains, cook stoves, whether he attended services regular. Not one had asked about grazing rotation. The mountains turned from purple to black as the sun dropped lower. Shadows stretched long across the valley floor. The air cooled by a few degrees, enough that Daniel noticed the sweat drying on his neck. "You know cattle." It wasn't a question. "My father ran a herd before the soldiers came." Her voice stayed flat. "I helped him from the time I could walk." Daniel didn't ask what happened to the herd. Didn't need to. The road curved around a stand of juniper, and the ranch came into view. Beautiful land. That's what his wife had said the first time she'd seen it. Rolling hills dotted with piñon, good grass, a creek that ran year-round. Even in drought, land a man could build a life on. The buildings told a different story. Whitewash peeling off the house like dead skin, sod roof patched with rusted tin in 3 places. The barn door hung crooked on one hinge, swinging lazy in the evening breeze. Fence posts leaned at angles. The kitchen garden, Sarah's garden. He still thought of it that way, lay brown and dead, choked with weeds gone to seed. Ayana said nothing. Daniel pulled the buckboard up beside the house and set the brake. The cast-iron pump stood by the kitchen door, its handle crusted with rust. He hadn't pumped water there in months. Easier to haul buckets from the creek. He climbed down, walked around to her side, offered his hand. She ignored it, stepped down on her own, carpetbag in her grip. Her eyes moved across the property. Fence line, dead garden, crooked barn door, the chicken coop with wire hanging loose, the woodpile that had shrunk to almost nothing. She didn't speak, didn't sigh, didn't shake her head, just looked. "You been running this alone how long?" The question landed like a fist to the gut. 4 years come November. She nodded. walked toward the house. Her moccasins made no sound on the packed dirt. Daniel followed. The porch boards groaned under his weight. One of them had cracked clean through last spring. He'd meant to fix it and never had. Ayanna tested each board with her foot before putting her full weight on it, like she already knew which ones would hold. He pushed open the front door. The smell of dust and cold ashes hit him. Kerosene lamp on the table. Wick trimmed low. Dirty dishes in the wash basin. A coat thrown over the back of a chair. Sarah's quilt still folded on the rocker where he'd left it 4 years ago. Ayanna's gaze swept the room, stopped on the quilt, moved on. Spare rooms through there. Daniel pointed to a door off the main room. Bed's made. Hasn't been used in a while. She crossed the room. Her hand rested on the door frame for a moment. Then she stepped through and closed the door behind her. The latch clicked. Daniel stood alone in the main room, kerosene lamp flickering in the draft from the open front door. Outside. Molly stamped and snorted, waiting to be unhitched. He rubbed his face with both hands. His palms came away gritty with trail dust. 30 days. He'd agreed to 30 days. Through the thin wall, he heard movement. The creak of bed springs, the thump of a carpet bag being set down. Then silence. He walked back outside to tend to the horse. The evening air had turned cool, and stars were beginning to prick through the darkening sky. Somewhere in the hills. A coyote yipped once and went quiet. Soil looks good. Daniel spun around. Ayanna stood in the doorway, silhouetted against the lamplight from inside. She was looking at the dead garden. Why's it gone to waste? His throat tightened. Didn't see the point. Just me. She made a sound. Low, not quite a word. That single sound carried something he couldn't name. Not pity, not judgment. Something else entirely. She turned and went back inside. Daniel stood by the buckboard, Molly's harness half undone in his hands, staring at the empty doorway. What had he just let into his house? The smell of coffee woke him. Daniel's eyes opened to gray light filtering through the window. Pre-dawn. The rooster hadn't crowed yet. But coffee strong. Boiled ground coffee drifted in from the kitchen. He sat up. The bed frame creaked beneath him. His boots stood where he'd left them. But the floor felt different under his feet when he stepped down. Cleaner. Swept. She'd swept his floor while he slept. He pulled on his boots and walked into the main room. The cook stove glowed orange through its iron door. A tin pot sat on top, steam curling from its spout. Beside it, a bowl of dough rising under a cloth biscuits, from the look of it. The sourdough starter crock that had sat untouched on the shelf for 3 years now sat open on the counter, a wooden spoon resting against its rim. Sarah's starter. She'd brought it from Missouri when they married. The front door stood open. Morning air, cool and sharp with sage, pushed into the room. Daniel poured himself coffee. The tin mug burned his fingers. He walked to the door and looked out. Ayanna crouched by the chicken coop, pliers in her hand. She'd found the baling wire, the salvaged roll he kept in the barn, and was threading it through the gaps in the fencing. Her movements were quick, efficient. Twist, pull, snip, move to the next hole. He walked across the yard. His boots crunched on gravel. She didn't look up. I was gonna get to that. Now you don't have to. She kept working. Twist, pull, snip. Daniel stood there, coffee cooling in his hand. The chickens clucked and scratched inside the coop. Unbothered by the repair work happening around them, one fat red hen pecked at the fresh wire, then wandered off. "You don't gotta prove nothing this early on," he said. "Ain't proving nothing." Twist, pull, snip, just working. He had no answer for that. He walked to the barn to check on the horses. The buckskin mare, the one Sarah had named Honey, though Daniel hadn't called her that in years, stood in the far stall. Ears pinned back. She'd been half wild since Sarah died. Wouldn't let anyone touch her. The farrier had given up trying to shoe her last spring. Daniel topped off the water trough and forked fresh hay into the stalls. When he came back out, the sun had crested the eastern hills. Ayanna was no longer at the chicken coop. The wire hung tight and even across every gap. He found her in the garden. She knelt in the dead soil, pulling weeds with her bare hands. A pile of dried stalks and tangled roots grew beside her. Her calico dress was already stained at the knees. "Soil's still good," she said without turning. "Just needs work." Daniel watched her for a long moment. Then he went to fix the barn door. The days blurred into rhythm. He worked on his side of the ranch. She worked on hers. They crossed paths at meals, breakfast before sunup, dinner after sundown. She'd taken over the cooking without asking. He hadn't complained. Her biscuits were better than anything he'd made in 4 years. On the third morning, she asked about the buckskin. "That one in the far stall. She yours?" Daniel set down his coffee cup. "Was my wife's. Won't let nobody near her now. Farrier says she's gone sour. Might have to sell her for what I can get." Ayanna said nothing, just looked toward the barn with those dark, steady eyes. That afternoon, Daniel was mending the south fence when he heard it. A sound he couldn't place at first. Low, rhythmic, almost like singing, but not quite. He walked back toward the barn. Ayanna stood at the paddock fence. The buckskin mare paced on the far side, ears swiveling. Ayanna's lips moved, but Daniel couldn't make out words, and not English, not Spanish. Something older. The mare stopped pacing. Daniel held his breath. Ayanna climbed the fence. Slow. No sudden movements. She dropped into the paddock and stood still. One hand extended, palm up. The humming continued, a low vibration that seemed to come from her chest, not her throat. The mare's nostrils flared. She took one step forward, then another. Daniel's coffee had gone cold in his hand. He didn't notice. The mare's ears came forward. Soft, no longer pinned. She stretched her neck toward Ayanna's hand, lips working. And then loss. She dropped her head into Ayanna's palm. Something shifted in Daniel's chest, a loosening he hadn't felt in years. The mare stood quiet while Ayanna stroked her neck, still humming that low, wordless sound. Her fingers worked through the tangled mane, picking out burrs and dried mud. The mare's eyes half closed. Daniel turned away, walked back to the south fence, picked up his hammer. His hands shook for the rest of the afternoon. On the evening of the 5th day, they ate dinner in the main room. Salt pork, beans, biscuits with butter she'd traded for at the general store on her walk to check the property lines. The kerosene lamp flickered between them. Its glass chimney was smoked on one side. He'd never cleaned it. Ayanna's eyes moved to the mantel, to the photograph in its wooden frame. "Your wife." Daniel's fork stopped halfway to his mouth. He set it down. "Sarah. Fever took her 4 years back. Children? No." His voice came out rough. "We tried." Never happened. Ayanna nodded. She didn't offer condolences, didn't say she was sorry, just nodded. Like she understood something the words couldn't carry. They finished eating. The silence between them had changed. Not comfortable exactly, but no longer sharp. Daniel pushed back from the table, gathered the dishes, carried them to the wash basin. "That buckskin," he said, his back to her. "She's yours now, if you want her." The silence stretched. "You sure? She chose you. Ain't nothing I can do about that." He heard her chair scrape against the floor, heard her footsteps cross the room, felt her stop somewhere behind him. "Thank you." 2 words, nothing more. But they landed in a place he'd thought had gone numb. He washed the dishes. She dried them and put them away. They moved around each other in the small kitchen, not touching, not speaking, finding a rhythm that needed no explanation. When the last plate was stacked, Ayanna walked to the door. "Tomorrow I want to check on the eastern herd, see how they're grazing." Daniel dried his hands on a rag. "I'll saddle the horses at first light." She nodded and stepped onto the porch. The door closed behind her. Daniel stood alone in the kitchen, dish rag still in his hands. The lamp threw his shadow long across the floor, through the window. He could see her silhouette moving toward the barn, toward the buckskin mare that had accepted her touch when it had refused everyone else for 4 years. He thought about Sarah, about the way she'd loved that horse, about the way the mare had stood at the paddock fence for days after the burial, waiting for someone who would never come back. Ayanna's shadow disappeared into the barn. Daniel hung up the dish rag, walked to the mantel, looked at Sarah's photograph. "I don't know what you'd make of this," he said quietly, "but I reckon you'd have liked her." The photograph didn't answer. It never did. He turned down the lamp and went to bed, somewhere in the night. A calf bawled once and went silent. Daniel's eyes opened in the dark. He listened. The sound didn't come again, but in the morning, he would find 3 head of cattle down by the water tank, breathing shallow, eyes glassy with fever. The calf lay on its side by the water tank, ribs heaving with each shallow breath. Its eyes had gone glassy, unfocused, foam crusted around its muzzle. Daniel's stomach dropped. "No." The word came out before he could stop it. "Not again." He knelt beside the animal, pressed his hand to its flank. The hide burned hot under his palm. He'd seen this before 3 years back, when the sickness had swept through and taken 32 head in 2 weeks. He'd burned the carcasses in a pile that smoked for 3 days. Ayanna appeared beside him. She dropped to her knees, her calico dress pooling in the dirt. Her hands moved quick, lifting the calf's lip to check the gums, prying open one eye to look at the whites, pressing her fingers into the belly. "How long?" "Found it just now. Was fine yesterday." She stood, looked toward the creek line 1/2 mile south. "Where's your water source? The one the cattle drink from?" Daniel pointed. "Tank here gets fed from the spring up the hill. Creek's down that way, but they don't go to it much. Too far from the grazing." Ayanna was already walking toward the barn. She moved fast, purpose in every step. Daniel heard the buckskin mare nicker as Ayanna entered. 2 minutes later, she rode out bareback, heading south toward the creek. She didn't look back. Daniel stayed with the calf. He checked the other cattle in the near pasture. 2 more were standing apart from the herd, heads drooping, not grazing. He drove them toward the barn, slow and careful, and penned them in the paddock. The sun climbed higher. Heat pressed down on his shoulders. He pumped water from the well into a bucket and tried to get the calf to drink. It wouldn't lift its head. 2 hours passed. She'd been gone 2 hours. He was checking the calf's breathing for the 10th time when hoofbeats sounded from the south. Ayana rode in at a trot. The buckskin mare lathered but not blown. She swung down before the horse stopped moving. In her hands, she carried a bundle wrapped in cloth roots trailing dirt. Bark strips, leaves he didn't recognize. "What's that?" "My grandmother knew things your doctor books don't." She walked past him toward the barn. "Get me hot water. And something to crush these in." Daniel found the old stone mortar and pestle in the kitchen. Sarah had used it for grinding herbs. He boiled water on the cook stove and carried the pot to the barn, where Ayana had laid out the plants on a horse blanket. She worked without speaking. Her hands separated roots from stems, stripped bark from branches, tore leaves into pieces. She dropped them into the mortar and ground them together, adding hot water in small splashes until the mixture turned into a thick green paste. The smell hit Daniel's nose bitter, sharp, with an undertone of something earthy he couldn't name. "Hold its head up." Daniel crouched behind the calf and lifted its head into his lap. The animal's eyes rolled, whites showing. Its breathing had gone ragged. Ayana pried open the calf's mouth and smeared the paste along its gums, under its tongue, down the sides of its throat. The calf tried to pull away. Daniel held firm. "Now we wait." She made more paste, spread it on the calf's chest, working it into the hide with her fingers. Then she showed Daniel how to do it, the pressure, the direction of the strokes, the way to feel for the heat under the skin. They treated the other 2 sick cattle the same way. The work took hours. By the time they finished, the sun had dropped below the western hills and the barn had gone dark except for the lantern Daniel hung from a rafter nail. The night stretched long. They took turns checking the animals. Daniel dozed against a hay bale, woke to find Ayana still awake, watching the calf's breathing. He took over. She slept for an hour, maybe 2. Then she was up again, grinding more paste, checking the cattle's eyes and gums. Somewhere past midnight, the calf's breathing steadied. The ragged heaving slowed into something closer to normal rhythm. Daniel pressed his hand to its flank. The fever had broken. The hide felt cooler. "It's working." Ayana nodded. She sat down on the hay bale beside him, close enough that he could feel the warmth from her shoulder but not touching. The lantern threw long shadows across the barn walls. Somewhere outside, an owl called once and went silent. "How'd you know what to do?" She didn't answer right away, and her eyes stayed on the calf. "Watch my grandmother, then my mother." A pause, then no one was left to watch. Daniel's chest tightened. He stared at his hands, dirt under the fingernails, green paste staining the creases of his palms. "My wife." The words came out rough. Fever came fast. Doc was 3 days out. By the time he got here, she was already gone. I just sat there watching her slip away. Couldn't do nothing. Ayana was quiet for a long time. When she spoke, her voice was flat. Not cold, just tired. "My children, same servants doctor bam too late, or didn't come at all." The lantern flame flickered. Shadows jumped and settled. "I'm sorry." "Sorry don't bring them back." She pulled a piece of straw from the bale and turned it between her fingers. "Work does. Keeps your hands busy." keeps your mind from going to places it shouldn't. Daniel understood. He'd spent 4 years learning that lesson the hard way. "I never asked for nobody's help," he said. "Figured I deserved to fail alone." Ayanna looked at him then. Her dark eyes caught the lantern light. "That ain't strength, Mr. Carter. That's just stubborn." He almost laughed. Didn't quite make it. But something in his chest loosened a knot he'd been carrying so long he'd forgotten it was there. They sat in silence until dawn crept through the barn door. The calf slept peaceful, breathing steady. The other 2 cattle were standing, drinking water, eyes clear. Over the next 3 days, Ayanna taught him which plants to gather, where to find them along the creek bed, how to prepare the medicine. 4 more cattle showed early signs. They caught it quick. None of them died. On the 9th morning, Daniel stood at the paddock fence watching the recovered cattle graze. Ayanna came to stand beside him, 2 tin cups of coffee in her hands. She passed one to him. "9 days," she said. He took the cup. Steam rose between them. 21 more." She nodded, sipped her coffee. Neither of them mentioned what would happen on day 31. They stood in silence, watching the herd. The morning sun warmed Daniel's shoulders. For the first time in 4 years, the ranch felt like something other than a slow defeat. Then Ayanna's head turned. Her eyes narrowed toward the eastern road. Daniel followed her gaze. 2 riders coming up from the direction of Red Creek. Town suits, dust on their boots. His hand tightened on the coffee cup. "You expecting company?" "No." Daniel set the cup on the fence post. "But I know who they are." The riders came slow up the eastern road, their horses kicking up dust that hung in the morning air like smoke. Daniel set his coffee cup on the fence post and walked toward the house. The Winchester leaned against the door frame where he always kept it. His hand reached for the stock, stopped, dropped to his side. No point. These men didn't come with guns. Ayanna followed him to the porch but stayed in the doorway, one shoulder against the frame. Her eyes tracked the riders as they approached. The first man wore a town suit, gray wool, too heavy for the September heat. A gold watch chain glinted across his vest. His mustache was oiled and trimmed neat, and when he smiled, his teeth showed white and even. The smile didn't touch his eyes. "Mr. Carter." He reined up at the edge of the yard and swung down from his horse. "Lovely morning, ain't it?" Daniel stayed on the porch, didn't come down to meet him. "Fletcher." Now. No need for that tone." Fletcher dusted off his sleeves, still smiling. "Just here to discuss options, friendly-like." The second man stayed mounted, bigger, broader across the shoulders. His face was shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat, and he didn't speak. Just sat there, hands loose on the reins, watching. Fletcher walked to the edge of the porch steps and looked up at Daniel. The smile stayed fixed. "I hear you had some trouble with your cattle. Sickness. Was it?" Daniel's jaw tightened. "News travels fast. Small territory. People talk." Fletcher shrugged, one hand waving casual. "Real shame about that. Disease can be unpredictable. One day your herd's fine. Next day half of them are dead. Terrible thing. Real unpredictable when it only hits ranchers who won't sell." The smile flickered. Just for a second. Then it was back, wider than before. "Now, Mr. Carter, that's a serious accusation. I'm just a businessman, here to make a fair offer for your water rights. Nothing more? Nothing less? Told you before, Fletcher. Not selling. Fletcher sighed. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a folded paper thick stock, official seal visible at the bottom. Things change. He held up the document. Cattle die, fences fall, man alone can't hold this much land forever. The Territorial Land Company is prepared to offer you a very generous price, more than generous, considering the condition of your operation. Daniel didn't look at the paper. Answer's the same. Fletcher's eyes drifted past Daniel's shoulder, toward the doorway, toward Ayanna. His gaze lingered, too long, traveled from her face down to her moccasined feet, and back up again. The smile changed, became something else. Something that made Daniel's hands curl into fists at his sides. Though I see you ain't alone anymore. Fletcher's voice dropped, smooth as oil. Interesting choice. Carter? Real interesting. Daniel moved without thinking. One step sideways, putting himself between Fletcher and the doorway, blocking the view. Fletcher's eyebrows rose. His smile turned knowing, protective. That's good. A man should protect what's his. He tucked the document back into his coat. Tell you what, I'll leave this with you to think over. No rush, but winter's coming. Carter, gets cold out here, gets lonely. Sometimes a man realizes he'd rather have cash in his pocket than pride in his chest. He walked back to his horse, swung up into the saddle. The big, silent man hadn't moved the whole time. I'll be back in a few weeks. Maybe you'll see things different by then. They turned their horses and rode back down the eastern road. Daniel watched until they disappeared over the ridge. His shoulders stayed tight. His fists stayed clenched. Ayanna came to stand beside him. That man, she said. His words go one way. His eyes go another. Emmett Fletcher. Bought up 3 ranches in the valley already. Always the same, makes an offer. Gets turned down. And then things start going wrong. Fences cut, cattle sick, water fouled. Pretty soon the rancher ain't got nothing left to sell except the land. And nobody stops him. Daniel's laugh came out bitter. Who's gonna stop him? Sheriff's office is 40 miles away. And Fletcher's got papers, territorial seals, everything legal and proper on the surface. He walked to the porch rail and leaned against it. His head dropped. The weight of 2 years pressed down on his shoulders. They've been circling for a long time now. Henderson's about ready to sell. Muller's holding on, but barely. Old Tom Weaver's got 3 sons. And even they can't keep up with everything that keeps going wrong. Ayanna stood silent for a moment. When she spoke, her voice was quiet. All of you, all the ranchers in the valley, everyone with water rights worth taking. And none of you talk to each other. Daniel looked up. What? You're all losing to the same man, all suffering the same troubles. And none of you sit down together to figure out how to fight back. That ain't how it's done out here. Every man handles his own problems. Ayanna crossed her arms. Her eyes found the distant ridge where the riders had disappeared. Maybe that's why you're all losing. The words landed hard. Daniel opened his mouth to argue. Closed it. She wasn't wrong. 4 years he'd been fighting alone, refusing help, refusing to admit he needed any. And what did he have to show for it? A ranch falling apart, a herd barely holding on, a life measured in stubborn survival instead of actual living. He thought about Henderson's place, 10 miles northwest. Muller's, 12 miles east. Tom Weaver's spread ran along the southern boundary, all of them within a day's ride, all of them facing the same pressure, all of them doing exactly what Daniel had been doing, suffering in silence, waiting for the hammer to fall. Henderson's wife, Ayanna said, she have children. The question caught him off guard. 3, 2 boys and a girl. Why, Muller's wife, 2 daughters, I think, maybe 3. And Weaver. His wife passed years back, but his sons are married, got families of their own. Ayanna nodded slowly. Something shifted behind her eyes, a calculation he couldn't read. The men won't listen to each other, she said. Pride won't let them. But the women... What about the women? She turned and walked back toward the house. At the doorway, she paused. The women talk to each other. They share recipes. They share news. They know whose husband is struggling and whose barn needs fixing. She looked back at him. If you want to beat a man like Fletcher, you don't fight him alone. And you don't start with the men. She went inside. The door stayed open behind her. Daniel stood on the porch. Fletcher's words still ringing in his ears. Winter's coming. He looked out across his land, the pastures, the fence lines, the distant hills where his cattle grazed, everything he'd built, everything Sarah had loved. He'd spent 4 years trying to hold it alone, and he'd been losing the whole time. Maybe she was right. Maybe the only way to win was to stop fighting by himself. But the thought of asking for help, of admitting to Henderson and Mueller and old Tom Weaver that he couldn't make it on his own, made his gut twist. He walked inside. Ayanna stood at the cook stove, adding wood to the fire. She didn't turn around. I ain't good at asking, he said. I know. Don't even know what I'd say. You don't have to. She closed the stove door and faced him. I'll do the asking, but you have to let me. Daniel leaned against the door frame. The silence stretched between them, filled with the pop and crackle of burning wood. Why? The question came out rougher than he intended. Why do you care whether I keep this place or lose it? Her eyes held his, steady, unblinking. Because I ain't running anymore, Mr. Carter. And neither should you. She walked past him onto the porch, heading toward the barn where the buckskin mare waited. The morning sun caught her dark hair as she moved. Daniel watched her go, 14 days into their agreement. And he'd just realized he didn't want her to leave when the 30 days were up. The question was whether he'd have anything left worth staying for. The south fence came down on day 19. Daniel heard the crack from across the pasture wood splintering, posts giving way. He ran toward the sound, boots pounding on hard-packed earth, and found 3 fence posts snapped clean at the base. The wire had tangled into a snarl of rusted metal and broken splinters. Cattle tracks led through the gap, fresh, heading toward the canyon where the ground dropped off steep and sudden. He ran. The herd had scattered. Most of them milled in the lower pasture. Confused but safe. But 4 head, including the calf they'd nursed through the sickness, had wandered too far. He could see them at the canyon's edge, 200 yards out, spooked by something and moving wrong. Daniel's lungs burned. His legs screamed. He was 53 years old and hadn't run like this in years. He reached the canyon rim just as the ground gave way under the led cow. The animal bellowed, front legs scrambling for purchase, hindquarters sliding down the muddy slope. The other 3 panicked, turning in circles, bumping into each other. Daniel grabbed for the lead cow's tail, caught nothing but air. She went over the edge with a sound that would stay with him for weeks, a wet, heavy crash. Then silence. He dropped to his knees at the rim, looked down. The cow lay at the bottom, 40 feet below, neck twisted at an angle that meant she wasn't getting up. The mud down there was black and thick, churned by recent rains into a soup that swallowed everything. The calf, the one they'd saved, stood at the edge, bawling for its mother. Daniel lunged for it. His boot caught on a root. He went down hard, face first into the mud at the canyon rim, and kept sliding. The ground was slick, unstable. His fingers clawed at wet earth that came apart in his hands. He slid 10 feet before he caught himself on a jutting rock. His whole body was caked in mud in his mouth, his eyes, his ears. He coughed and spat, trying to clear his throat. The taste was foul, rot and clay and something dead. Above him, the calf still bawled. Daniel tried to climb back up. His boots slipped. He fell again, slamming his shoulder into the rock hard enough to send white sparks across his vision. The pain shot down his arm and into his chest. He lay there, face down in the mud, 53 years old, and unable to climb a 40-foot slope. This was what he'd become. A man who couldn't save his own cattle. A man who couldn't climb out of a hole. A man who'd spent 4 years pretending he could handle everything alone and had nothing to show for it but a dead cow at the bottom of a canyon and mud filling his mouth. The shame hit harder than the pain. He thought about Sarah, about the look on her face the day he'd brought her to this land. "We'll build something here," he'd said, "something that lasts." And she'd believed him. She'd believed every word. Now she was dead and the ranch was dying and he was lying face down in black mud, too weak to pull himself up. A sound came from above, hoofbeats, then a voice. "Mr. Carter." "Ayanna." He couldn't look up, couldn't let her see him like this. The mud pressed against his cheek, cold and wet, and he wished it would swallow him whole. "Mr. Carter, take the rope." Something landed beside his hand, coiled rope, thrown from above. He stared at it. His fingers wouldn't move. "Take the rope." Her voice was calm. No panic. No judgment. Just that same steady tone she used for everything. Daniel's hand closed around the rope. He felt it go taut as she wrapped the other end around her saddle horn. The buckskin mare's hooves dug into the ground above. He climbed, hand over hand, boots slipping, shoulder screaming, mud sloughing off him in clumps. When he reached the top, he collapsed onto solid ground and lay there, breathing hard, staring at the sky. Ayanna didn't say anything. She tied off the rope and walked to the canyon's edge, looked down at the dead cow, looked at the calf, still bawling. Then she climbed down. Daniel pushed himself up on one elbow, watched her descend the slope with sure feet, using roots and rocks for handholds, moving like she'd done this 100 times. She reached the calf, spoke to it in that low, humming voice, and guided it away from the edge. Somehow she got it back up the slope, half pushing, half carrying, while Daniel lay useless at the top. When she reached him, she was covered in mud, too. It streaked her face, her arms, her calico dress. She set the calf down, and it stumbled toward the herd on shaky legs. Daniel sat up. His whole body ached. His shoulder throbbed with every heartbeat. "The fence," he said. His voice came out cracked. "Posts were cut. Not broken. Cut. Ayanna nodded. She'd already seen it. Fletcher. Can't prove it. Don't need to prove it to know. She sat down beside him on the muddy ground. Neither of them moved to stand. The sun was setting, turning the sky orange and red. I can't do this, he said. The words came out before he could stop them. I've been pretending for 4 years that I can hold this place together, and I can't. I'm 53 years old. I got nothing. No family, no help, no future. Just debt and dirt and a dead cow at the bottom of a canyon. Ayanna said nothing, just sat there, mud drying on her skin, watching the sunset. I almost sent you back that first day, Daniel continued. His voice dropped. You want to know why, really why? She turned her head, looked at him. I didn't send you back because I thought you couldn't make it out here. I sent you back because... He stopped, swallowed. The words fought him every inch of the way. A woman like you shouldn't have to settle for what I got left. You deserve better than a broken-down ranch and a broken-down man who can't even climb out of a mud hole without help. The silence stretched. Coyotes started up somewhere in the hills, their cries rising and falling in the cooling air. My husband was a good man, Ayanna said finally. Strong, proud. The soldiers came anyway, shot him in front of our children. Daniel's breath caught. My son was 6. My daughter was 4. The sickness took them both the same winter. I buried them with my own hands, dug the graves myself, because there was no one left to help. Her voice stayed flat. No tears, no trembling, just facts, delivered like weather reports. I spent 5 years after that wishing I was dead too, working just to keep my hands busy, not caring whether I lived or died, long as I didn't have to think. She looked at him, her eyes caught the last light of the sunset. Then I saw your advertisement. Practical woman, don't mind plain. And I thought maybe this man is like me. Maybe he's just trying to survive one more day. Maybe we could survive together. Daniel couldn't speak. I ain't here because I'm running. Mr. Carter. She stood up, mud cracking on her dress. I'm here because I'm done standing still. The question is, are you... She walked toward the horses, leaving him sitting in the dirt. Daniel stayed where he was. The stars came out, one by one. The mud dried stiff on his clothes. His shoulder ached. The dead cow lay at the bottom of the canyon, and the fence was still down, and Fletcher was still circling. But something had changed. He'd spent 4 years building walls. Tonight, someone had seen through them, seen the shame underneath, the fear, the bone-deep belief that he wasn't worth saving, and she'd stayed anyway. He pushed himself to his feet, walked toward where Ayanna stood with the horses. His shoulder twinged with every step. Tomorrow, he said, I want you to ride to Henderson's place, talk to his wife. Ayanna looked at him, a question in her eyes. You were right. I can't beat Fletcher alone. None of us can. He paused. And I'm done trying. She nodded once, handed him the reins to his horse. They rode back to the ranch in silence. Stars wheeling overhead, coyotes singing in the distance. 11 days left on their agreement. And for the first time since Sarah died, Daniel Carter wanted to see what came after. Day 22. Ayanna stood by the buckskin mare at first light, saddlebags packed, canteen full. I need the mare for 6 days, maybe 7. Daniel set down his coffee cup. Where you going? Visiting. She swung up into the saddle before he could ask more. The mare turned east, toward Henderson's place, and Ayanna rode out without looking back. Daniel spent the next 6 days alone. He mended the south fence, put in new posts, strung fresh wire, checked every inch for signs of tampering. He buried the dead cow at the bottom of the canyon, working with shovel and sweat until the job was done. He fed the cattle, cleaned the barn, fixed the pump handle that had been sticking for months. His shoulder ached with every swing of the hammer, every lift of the shovel. But he kept working. The work kept his hands busy, kept his mind from wandering to places it shouldn't go. On the evening of day 23, smoke rose from Henderson's chimney 2 columns instead of 1. Someone was cooking extra. Day 24. He spotted a wagon on the road heading toward Muller's place. Day 25. 3 riders passed along the southern ridge, moving toward old Tom Weaver's spread. Something was happening. Something Ayanna had set in motion. She rode back on the morning of day 28. The buckskin mare was tired but not blown. Ayanna herself looked worn dust on her dress, shadows under her eyes, but there was something different in the way she held her shoulders. Straighter, lighter. "They're coming," she said. "Who?" "All of them." Daniel's stomach dropped. "What did you tell them?" Ayanna swung down from the saddle, led the mare toward the water trough. "I talked to the wives. Henderson's wife, Martha. Her youngest has had a cough for 3 weeks. I showed her how to make a poultice. Sat with the boy through one night until his breathing eased." Daniel followed her. "And Muller's wife, Clara. Her daughter Mary had a fever that wouldn't break. I stayed 2 nights. Fever broke on the 2nd morning. Mary opened her eyes and asked for breakfast." "Ayanna." "Old Tom Weaver's daughter-in-law is expecting. Baby was turned wrong. I showed her exercises to help it turn right. Stayed to make sure it worked." She let the mare drink, turned to face Daniel. "I didn't ask them to come. Mr. Carter, I just helped them. And then I told them the truth that their husbands are all losing to the same man, that none of them talk to each other, that if they keep fighting alone, they'll all end up with nothing. And the wives talked to their husbands." A ghost of a smile crossed her face. "Women have ways of making men listen." Daniel stood there, speechless. 6 days. She'd done in 6 days what he couldn't have done in 6 years. "They're coming this afternoon," Ayanna said. "All of them. Henderson, Muller, old Tom Weaver with his 3 sons, even some of the smaller homesteaders from the Eastern Valley." "Why here? Why my place?" She looked at him. Those dark, steady eyes. "Because you're the one who asked for help first. That took courage, Mr. Carter, more than you know." Daniel turned away. His throat had gone tight. He hadn't asked. Not really. He'd just stopped saying no. But maybe that was enough. The first wagon appeared at 2 o'clock. Daniel stood on the porch, watching it come up the eastern road. Henderson's rig he recognized, the patched canvas cover, the mismatched team of horses. Martha Henderson sat beside her husband. Their 3 children crowded in the back. Behind them, Muller's wagon. Clara Miller held the reins while her husband sat beside her, arms crossed, face unreadable. Their daughters peeked out from under the canvas. Then old Tom Weaver. No wagon, just horses. Tom rode in front, white beard bristling, tobacco bulge in his cheek. His 3 sons flanked him, wives and children following on a second set of horses. More came. Families Daniel barely knew. Small homesteaders from the far edges of the valley. People he'd seen in town but never spoken to. They came in wagons, on horseback, some on foot. They came with covered dishes and water jugs and children who spilled out and started running before the wheels stopped turning. Daniel's yard filled with people. He stepped down from the porch. Henderson climbed down from his wagon and walked toward him. The two men had known each other for 8 years, hadn't spoken more than a dozen words in the last 2. Some of the men shifted uncomfortable when they first saw Ayanna standing by the corral. Eyes darted, feet shuffled. But then Martha Henderson walked straight to her and took her hand. And that settled it. Didn't know you were still fighting. Carter. Henderson's voice was gruff. Thought you'd given up. Daniel's mouth was dry. So did I. Henderson stuck out his hand. Daniel took it. The handshake lasted longer than either of them expected. Muller came over. Then Tom Weaver, tobacco juice staining his beard. Then the sons, the wives, the neighbors Daniel had ignored for 4 years while he wallowed in his own grief. Your woman came to see Martha, Henderson said. Helped with the baby's cough. Wouldn't take no payment. She sat with my Mary 2 nights, Clara Mueller added. She stood beside her husband, eyes wet. I thought we was gonna lose her. Then that fever broke and Mary opened her eyes and asked for breakfast. Daniel looked across the yard. Ayanna stood by the corral, surrounded by women. They were talking, gesturing, some of them crying. Martha Henderson had her hand on Ayanna's arm. I didn't do nothing, Daniel said. She did it all. She asked. Old Tom Weaver said. The old man spat tobacco juice into the dirt. Nobody ever asked before. We was all too proud, too stubborn. He shook his head. If we talked to each other 2 years ago, wouldn't have lost the Miller place. The Miller place. Daniel remembered. Good land, good water. Fletcher had bought it for pennies after the family gave up and moved east. Fletcher's been at all of you, Daniel asked. Every man nodded. Same story, Henderson said. Cattle sick, fences cut, water fouled. He waits till we're broke and desperate. Then comes in with his papers and his smile. We've been fighting him alone, Weller said. All of us. Never thought to stand together. Hoofbeats sounded on the eastern road. Every head turned. 4 riders, Fletcher in front. Smile already in place. 3 men behind him bigger, harder. The kind of men who got paid to look threatening. Fletcher reined up at the edge of the yard. His smile flickered when he counted the wagons. Flickered again when he counted the men. Well, his voice came out smooth, but something underneath had cracked. Looks like you're having a party, Carter. Daniel stepped forward. The other men moved with him. Henderson on his left, Muller on his right, old Tom Weaver and his 3 sons fanning out behind. Nobody spoke. Fletcher's eyes moved across the crowd, the women standing together by the corral, the children watching from behind wagon wheels, the men, 12 of them, maybe more standing in a loose line across the yard. I came to discuss business, Fletcher said. His smile was gone now. Private business. Ain't nothing private about it. Old Tom Weaver stepped forward, tobacco juice dribbling down his chin. We all know what you've been doing. Fletcher, the sick cattle, the cut fences, the fouled water. Those are serious accusations, Mr. Weaver. Ain't accusation. Facts. Weaver spat again. The tobacco juice landed an inch from Fletcher's horse's hoof. You've been picking us off one by one because we was too proud to help each other. Well, that's done now. Fletcher's jaw tightened. His hands shifted on the reins. Behind him, his three men exchanged glances, uncertain, calculating. Daniel watched Fletcher's face. The smooth mask was cracking. Underneath, something else showed through bad anger. Yes, but also something older, wearier. "This ain't over," Fletcher said. His voice had lost its polish. "The Territorial Land Company has legal rights." "Legal rights to what?" Henderson stepped forward. "To poison our cattle, to cut our fences. You try bringing that to a judge. Fletcher, see how far your papers get you when 12 families testify against you." Fletcher's horse shifted, sensing its rider's unease. The three men behind him were no longer looking at the ranchers. They were looking at each other, calculating odds, counting numbers. One of them, the biggest, with a scar across his chin, turned his horse. "Emmett, this ain't worth it." Fletcher spun in the saddle. "What?" "Look at them." The scarred man gestured toward the yard. "Women and children watching. Whole valley here to testify. You push this. It don't end quiet." Fletcher's face went red, then white. His hands gripped the reins so tight his knuckles showed bone. Daniel saw it then. The moment Fletcher looked at the scarred man, looked at his own hired muscle, and saw them backing away, saw his own people refusing to follow. The silence stretched. A child laughed somewhere behind the wagons. A horse stamped. Fletcher looked at Daniel. Their eyes met. "This ain't over," he said again, but his voice had no weight. He turned his horse, rode back down the eastern road, his men following. None of them looked back. The yard stayed silent until the hoofbeats faded. Then old Tom Weaver let out a breath and spat one more time. "Believe that's the last we'll see of him." Daniel wasn't sure, but he didn't say so. The women came forward. Martha Henderson had tears on her cheeks. Clara Muller was clutching Ayanna's hand. "Thank you," Ayanna said to them, "for coming, for listening." "Thank you," Martha Henderson replied. "My boy's breathing easy now because of you. That's worth more than any land." The children started playing again. Someone brought out the covered dishes, biscuits and beans, and salt pork and pie. Food appeared on every surface. Coffee brewed on Daniel's cook stove, tended by women who moved through his kitchen like they'd always been there. Daniel stood on the porch, watching his yard fill with life. Neighbors he'd ignored, friends he'd pushed away, a community he'd forgotten he belonged to. Henderson came to stand beside him. "You got a good woman there, Carter." Daniel didn't answer, just watched Ayanna move through the crowd, helping where help was needed, accepting thanks she didn't seem to want. "You're planning to keep her?" The question landed hard. 2 days left on their agreement. 2 days, and she'd be free to leave, free to go anywhere, free to find someone better than a broken-down rancher with dirt under his fingernails. "That ain't up to me," Daniel said. Henderson grunted. "Then maybe you ought to make it up to you." He walked away to join his wife. Daniel stayed on the porch, watching the sun drop toward the western hills. The yard was full of laughter and conversation, and the sounds of people who'd remembered how to be neighbors. But all he could see was Ayanna, the way she moved, the way she listened, the way she'd looked at him in the mud that night and seen through every wall he'd built. 2 days. He had 2 days to figure out what he wanted to say, and for the first time in his life, Daniel Carter was more afraid of silence than of speaking. The rooster crowed at first light. Daniel's eyes opened to the smell of coffee drifting through the thin wall. Strong, boiled grounds, the way she'd been making it every morning for 30 days. 30 days. He lay there, staring at the ceiling beams, counting the knots in the wood, the same ceiling he'd stared at for 4 years. But something about it looked different now, cleaner. The cobwebs were gone from the corners. The dust that had settled on everything had been swept away. She'd changed the whole house without him noticing. He pulled on his boots and walked into the main room. The cook stove glowed warm. 2 tin cups sat on the table, steam rising from both. Through the window, morning light fell across the floor in golden bars, and the window itself looked different. Calico curtains hung on either side, blue and white, edges hemmed neat. He hadn't seen her hang them, didn't know where she'd gotten the fabric. The front door stood open. Cool air pushed in, carrying the smell of sage and something else, something green. Daniel picked up his coffee cup and walked onto the porch. Ayanna stood at the railing, her own cup in her hands. She didn't turn when he came out, just kept looking at the eastern hills, where the sun was climbing slow and steady into a sky turning from pink to gold. He came to stand beside her. The porch boards creaked under his weight, except the cracked one. That one held firm. He'd fixed it sometime in the last week. He hadn't asked her to. 30 days, he said. She nodded. 30 days. The silence stretched between them. Not uncomfortable, just full. Daniel's eyes moved across the yard. The barn door hung straight now, both hinges repaired. The chicken coop wire was tight and even. The woodpile had grown to twice its size. He'd been chopping more than usual, working off energy he couldn't name. And the garden. He set down his coffee cup on the porch railing. Where Sarah's garden had been brown and dead and choked with weeds for 4 years, green shoots pushed up through dark soil. Rows of them, neat and even, leaves unfurling toward the morning sun. When did you? Last week. Ayanna sipped her coffee. You were mending the south pasture fence. I found seeds in your wife's things, in a tin box under the bed. Sarah's seeds. She'd saved them every year, planning for a spring she never got to see. Daniel's throat closed up. He gripped the porch railing. The wood was rough under his palms, worn smooth in some places, splintered in others. Beans, Ayanna said. Squash. Tomatoes. I think. Won't know till they get bigger. He couldn't speak, just stood there, watching the green shoots catch the morning light, watching 4 years of neglect turn into something alive. South fence still needs work, he said finally. His voice came out rough. Ayanna nodded. I know. Saw it yesterday. Might take a while, a month, maybe. Might take longer than that. Another silence. The sun climbed higher, somewhere in the barn. The buckskin mare nickered. Daniel turned to face her. She was still looking at the hills, but her eyes had shifted, waiting. You could do better than this place, he said. The words came hard, like pulling nails from old wood. Better than me. Ayanna turned then, looked at him with those dark, steady eyes. Probably. The word landed like a fist. Daniel's chest tightened. Ain't looking for better, though. She set her coffee cup on the railing beside his. Looking for honest. That I got. I know. Something moved in her face. Not quite a smile. Something deeper. Why you think I stayed? Daniel's hands were shaking. He hadn't noticed until now. He shoved them in his pockets, then pulled them out again. Useless. Wait here. He went inside. The bedroom door stuck on its hinges. He'd been meaning to plane it down for months. He pushed through and crossed to the dresser. The top drawer groaned when he pulled it open. The gold band sat where he'd left it, in a small wooden box, cushioned by a scrap of cloth. Sarah's ring. The one he'd put on her finger 23 years ago in a church in Missouri. She'd worn it every day until the fever took her. He'd taken it off her hand himself after he picked it up. The metal was warm from sitting in the drawer, catching whatever heat the room held, thin from years of wear, but still a circle, still unbroken. He walked back to the porch. Ayanna hadn't moved. She stood by the railing, watching him come out, her face unreadable. Daniel stopped in front of her, held out his hand. The ring sat in his palm, catching the morning light. Belonged to my wife. Ayanna looked at the ring, then at him. She'd have liked you, I think. His voice cracked. He pushed through. Practical. Ayanna reached out. Her fingers brushed his palm as she lifted the ring. She held it up, studying it, the thin gold band. The scratches from years of work, the way the light moved through it. She slid it onto her finger. It fit like it had been waiting. Neither of them spoke. The sun rose higher, warming their faces. The rooster crowed again, and the chickens started their morning clucking, and somewhere in the pasture the cattle lowed. I ain't good at this, Daniel said. Never was. Sarah used to say I had the romantic instincts of a fence post. Ayanna's mouth twitched, almost a smile. I don't need romance, Mr. Carter. Daniel. She looked at him. If you're going to wear that ring, you ought to call me Daniel. The almost smile became real. Small, quiet, but there. Daniel. She tested the word. I don't need romance. Daniel. I need work. I need land. I need a man who'll stand beside me when the hard times come and not run when things get ugly. I ain't running. I know. She turned to face the yard, the garden, the barn, the hills beyond. That's why I stayed. He reached out, took her hand. Her fingers were rough with calluses, strong from work. They curled around his and held on. We got a lot to do, and he said. South fence needs finishing. Barn roof's got a leak I've been ignoring. And the herd needs moving to the autumn pasture before the weather turns. Then we better get started. She let go of his hand, walked down the porch steps, headed toward the barn where the buckskin mare was waiting. Daniel followed. The morning sun warmed his back as he walked. The air smelled of sage and coffee and something green new growth, pushing up through soil that had been dead for years. His boots crunched on gravel. His shoulder twinged with the movement, still healing from the fall in the canyon. His hands were rough and cracked and stained with work he'd never be done with. But for the first time in 4 years, the ache in his chest was gone. He caught up to Ayanna at the barn door. She was already reaching for the buckskin's halter, talking to the mare in that low humming voice. Ayanna? She turned. Thank you. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she nodded once and went back to the horse. Daniel walked to his own horse's stall, started the morning routine hay, water, checked the hooves, the work he'd done every day for 20 years, the work that never ended and never would. But today it felt different. Today the barn didn't echo with silence. Today there was another set of hands working beside him, another voice humming low. Another presence filling the space that had been empty for so long. He led his horse out into the morning light. Ayana was already mounted on the buckskin, reins loose, waiting. The sun had cleared the eastern hills now, flooding the valley with gold. The garden's green shoots stood bright against the dark soil. The cattle dotted the far pasture, grazing peaceful. Smoke rose from the chimney, the cook stove still burning, keeping the coffee warm for when they came back. Daniel swung up into the saddle. His shoulder protested, but he ignored it. They rode out together, side by side, toward the south fence that still needed mending. The sky stretched wide and blue above them. The land rolled out in every direction, beautiful and hard and unforgiving. His land, their land now. He didn't look back at the house. Didn't need to. He knew what was there, a home that had been dying and was now coming back to life. A garden that would feed them come autumn. A porch where they'd sit together when the day's work was done. The future stretched ahead, uncertain and full of work. Fletcher might try again someday. The weather might turn harsh. The cattle might get sick, but he wouldn't face it alone. That was the difference. That was everything. Daniel Carter rode toward the south fence with the woman who'd become his partner. The morning sun warm on his shoulders, the weight of 4 years finally lifting from his chest. Not the bride he'd expected. The one he'd needed all along. Some stories settle in the chest before they settle in the mind. This one may have left something quiet there, a weight, perhaps, or a tenderness you weren't expecting. That's all right. It doesn't need a name. Many of us have stood where Daniel stood, carrying something alone for too long, believing we didn't deserve help, or that asking would make us less. Some of us have been Ayana, too, arriving somewhere new, with nothing but calloused hands and a heart still learning how to hope again. We know what it is to be unseen, to work without recognition, to love without knowing if it will be returned. These things don't always resolve the way we want. Sometimes the fence stays broken a little longer. Sometimes the garden doesn't grow. But sometimes, just sometimes, someone shows up with steady hands and asks nothing in return except the chance to stand beside us. It's okay if the story stirred something you thought had gone quiet. You don't have to understand it. You're allowed to let it rest. Thank you for staying until the end. Thank you for listening.